welcome to the Knock Knock Episode 7 Q&A. My name is Jason B. Jones, and I'm here with my brother and our communications director, Simon Jones.
Hey, Jason, how's it going?
We're live here in Starkville, Mississippi, and could not be happier and more honored.
Absolutely. It's been a wild trip. We got in about not even 24 hours ago, and we hit the ground running, going around town, seeing how much Starkville has changed and where things happened and where people lived. And this is my first time being back here since I was 3, 4.
No, the last time we were here was to celebrate. I mean, obviously we were here for Betty's funeral, but you were celebrating your 4th birthday.
So I'm kind of seeing Starkville for the first time, and it's been really amazing. It's very quite modern. It's awesome to see the changes, and the university is just so large, and it's everywhere in this town. We live in Nashville, so in Nashville there's not one school, there's several, so you're kind of either Team Belmont, Team Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Not everyone wears the same colors in Nashville. There's a few different teams everyone's rooting for.
Yeah, you don't have to really pick your clothes here when you live in Starkville because it's just everything's maroon, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you know what's really special, I think, about this weekend specifically, and it just sort of turned out this way. We didn't necessarily plan when we started the podcast that it would end on Labor Day weekend, 28 years after Betty passed. And so I just have to believe that there's some destiny in that, and that we've come to this point and we've told the story in the best way that we can, and we're so hopeful that someone can sort of take the torch from here and continue to pursue justice for Betty and Catherine.
It was really important for us to end this season of our podcast in the place that it began, where Jason came and was kind of on the ground and learning what he could. We wanted to come back to end this, and this will be our last episode of the season. But again, I said this earlier, but I want to personally thank each and every person that came here today. It means a lot to our family. It means so much that you would take time out of your Friday evening to be with us and to help honor Betty and Catherine, and listen to us talk about something that we've created in their memory. So thank you, really, thank you.
And as always, thank you for listening to episode 7. It's honestly been bittersweet to finish up our season after a year, but it's really amazing to read everybody's love and comments and to really see continued interest in the case. We have had, Simon, I don't know if you know this, I think we're at about 207,000 downloads from people who have taken the time to listen to this. So it's just amazing. When we started, we were talking about this earlier today. We just didn't know who would care. We started off, and obviously this was super important to us, and it was an effort in trying to digitally memorialize Betty and Catherine and this pursuit for justice, but we didn't know if anybody outside of our mom would care about the work that we're doing. And it's just, I'm humbled and blown away that, there's thousands and thousands of people who have downloaded this show and listened to it as well.
And reached out to us too. We, I think, really underestimated the number of people and the stories that we would hear and the people we would meet as a result of creating this. Namely, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but namely, we met someone who was named after Betty and whose family escaped genocide, and Betty helped to foster them here in Starkville to get on their feet. And Betty made such an impact on their lives that when their daughter was born, they named her after her. And we got to hear from her in episode 7 some, and we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, we are honored to be joined by our resident historian, my mom, Colleen Jones, who, if we would have had her experiences, I don't think we would have been able to tell this story at all. And we were talking earlier today about how this all began, and it began with me really going to mom and dad and saying, hey, I have this idea. I think I want to tell this story, but I understand how it's going to bring up a lot of emotions and a lot of pain. And I asked Mom and Dad's permission and said, hey, is this something that you would want to do? And I think one of the things that Mom said was that it felt like an assignment. It felt like this was the thing that we needed to do in order to bring this story back to the forefront. Mom, tell me, what was it like just to be a part of this process?
Well, it was very interesting because I didn't know what a podcast was at all until Jason explained to me that it was very much like radio, where you would listen to like a serialized program every week or so. I kind of fall in between radio and television. I remember my parents talking about listening to radio programs, but I did know what it was. And he explained to me that most of this would be in an audio fashion. And so the first interviews were in my house at the kitchen table, where we just went down memory lane and reminisced about Betty and the things that we remembered about her, and how we got the call from my sister-in-law about what had happened, and how we grabbed everything and came to Starkville to find out all the terrible details that no one told us over the telephone, because everyone was just so torn up and so much in shock that very first night that we could hardly speak about it until we got here. And we stayed for about 2 weeks and helped the rest of the family as best we could. And then we returned to Houston, and we didn't come back for 27 years.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people here in this room who walked through that as well, either as friends of Betty or Catherine, or people who just were aware of this crime. I was talking to some of you before we got started that there was a real fear in Starkville after this happened, because he wasn't caught, and was this going to happen again? And that was something that we weren't privy to. We were here for 2 weeks. I was 10, you were 4. You have flashes of memory. I think the only thing you remember is like jumping on a friend's trampoline while you were here for your birthday.
Pine trees, lots of pine trees.
Yeah, and lightning bugs. That was it. I remember catching lightning bugs. We didn't have those in Houston. So, but for many of the people who were here after those 2 weeks after we left, there was this continued fear and interest and drama and all of this stuff that we literally had no knowledge of until we started to research and read the papers and read that there was there's this blame game with government and law enforcement, and there was just all of this stuff that you guys were having to deal with because there were no answers. And so it's been a crazy journey for us as we unpacked what happened on September 3rd, 1990, what happened in the aftermath, and then also learning more about Betty and Catherine. Simon, let's just jump into what your thoughts were specifically. We released episode 7 about a week ago, and it was really, I remember when you called me, we got a contact via our contact form on our website, and you called me and said, Jason, I think this is our season finale. And I was like, what are you even talking about? He's like, you've got to call this girl. Her story is unbelievable. Simon, tell me just what you thought about episode 7 in general, and also, Betty and getting to know her.
Yeah, after meeting Betty Hong and her parents, we quickly agreed that our theme needed to be legacy. That's how we wanted to end with episode 7 is looking back on the podcast as a whole. What have we learned? But more importantly, what is Betty and Catherine's lasting legacy? How have their lives continued to impact others long after their passing? And so we tried to recap that some. I thought that was great how we were able to include lots of clips from previous episodes to give everyone, to give you a refresher of the past 6 episodes were about, and then lead right into Betty's interview. Betty Hong was so sweet when we first talked to her on the phone, and we had the privilege of meeting her in person. And what I think impacted me the most was we were able to have dinner with her parents. They're in Nashville. We had no idea. Here are a man and his wife who were so impacted by Betty living on the other side of town.
I mean, it quite literally, it's like 10 minutes from my house.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
We were pretty shocked because we thought, I remember asking her, "Oh, your parents, this is so wonderful. I'm so glad you're telling us this. Where do they live now?" "Oh, they're in Nashville." "What?"
Yeah.
Like, where? And yeah, it was so close, and we were able to have dinner with them. And
she literally said, "You need to call my mom, and she'll put together an Asian feast." That's literally what she said, and we're like, we're in.
And that's what happened.
That's all we need, yeah.
And they broke out the photo albums, and they kind of walked us through their story that led them out of Cambodia and into Starkville, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how Betty was a part of that transition, not only into American life, but also into, I think, with their faith as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, everything that we're learning about Betty is that it was hard to be around Betty for more than a few minutes without her talking about her faith and her church. Mom, I would say that...
And baseball.
And baseball. and Mississippi State baseball. Mom, you've said on many occasions that she represented the type of grandmother that you want to be. Talk a little bit about how Betty impacted your life.
Well, I didn't know that at the time. I used to say that I wanted to emulate Betty as a mother-in-law, but yes, now I can say that I want to emulate her as a grandmother because now I have three grandchildren, and as a great grandmother, she would have been so proud. Anyway, yes, Betty was the type of person, as many of you know, that never met a stranger. You knew her you were in the room with her for 5 minutes, and she made you feel like you were the most important person that she had met that day. And she just embraced us from the moment that we met her, which was just a few days before my father-in-law married her. And it was as if we had known each other for years. There wasn't anything that she and I couldn't talk about, and she was the best stepmother to my husband that we could have asked for, and she completed my father-in-law's life. They only had 3 years together before the Lord took him home, but he was so happy during that time, and Betty took such good care of him that there was no way we could ever thank her enough. She was just the very best, and I have missed her every day since she left.
You know, what's really cool about learning more about Betty is that, you know, she was only married to our biological grandfather for a short period of time, yet she chose to continue to be our grandmother throughout the rest of her time here on earth. And that's what's so impactful to me is not that there was similar blood running between our veins, was that she chose us. She chose to continue. I don't know if I would have done the same thing, you know, but her heart was one that everyone was family. And the ripples that come out from her life are still impacting people today, impacting Betty Hong, impacting Juki Krigler-Holt, impacting people that have even reached out to you, Simon, since episode 6 has come out.
We continue to get messages from people who hear about our podcast, and maybe they listen to a few episodes, maybe they don't, but they will message us and say, "I knew Betty," or "My mother or my grandmother was best friends with her, and this is so awesome that you're doing this. There needs to be justice, and there needs to be resolution." And one of those people, her name is Angie, she contacted me after recording episode 7, so we weren't able to feature it, but I did want to mention her today. Angie was in the emergency room the night this happened and was on duty when Catherine came into the hospital, and was sitting with Catherine when Catherine was giving her report, when Catherine was speaking to the police. Angie was the nurse attending to her, and she told me what a brave woman she was and how she had a remarkable composure for what she had just been through. And she was, again, just so happy to hear that people are still talking about this, people still care, and they still want to find out who did this. So, yeah. So Angie, if you're listening, thank you for sharing your story. Again, it really means a lot. Stacy was another person who reached out to us, who I hope to hear from some more. She told us that her grandmother and Betty were best friends. So these are just examples of people that we didn't know existed, that through the podcast were able to contact and were able to know more about Betty and find out who she was long after she's not here to tell us herself.
Yeah, it's just been an honor to be able to hear from those people. And I mean, Betty Hong said something that blew me away when I was talking to her, that just said, there are 2 times in my life that I looked up Betty. One was when I came to Starkville and was attending the funeral of another close friend of Betty's, and the second one was when I Googled her name and your podcast came out. That's what didn't happen for me when I looked Betty up that caused me to do this, is I looked up Betty's name, I looked up Catherine's name, I looked up the Labor Day murders, and there was no digital footprint. I couldn't find anything, and that's what compelled us to start telling the story. And to be honest, up until episode 6, I just didn't know if we had really done any good, like if we had done anything that was worthwhile beyond us making something that was a bit of a time capsule for us, right? That we could always go back and refer to and say, this is how Betty lived, this is how Catherine lived, this is, a conversation about the case. Other than it being just for us, I didn't really know if it was impacting anybody else, and then Betty called. And I have to, Mom and I have a similar take on this, is that we just have to believe that that's a postcard from God telling us that we're on the right track and we're doing the right thing. Mom, what are your thoughts on that?
It's just amazing. It's like when I met Juki for the first time, and also meeting Betty for the first time, and her parents. Her mom is just amazing in the things that she remembers about Betty, and how she helped her acclimate to living not only in a foreign country, but in America, and helped her to get her children into school, and helped her to have clothes that she felt comfortable in wearing to services at First Presbyterian. Mm-hmm. And that everything that she said was, it was like she had visited with Betty and was telling me about it, because it was so much the Betty that I knew. It wasn't anything that I thought, oh, really? It was as if she was giving me a report from having a visit with her. It was wonderful to hear.
Simon, let's jump a little bit into the kind of less the stories and more where we are today. Since we released our episode, there's been some significant breaks in the case around some new techniques and new tools that Sergeant Bill Lott has been pursuing. Simon, can you talk just a little bit about what we discovered and what are some of those new resources that we have now?
Yeah, so as some of you probably already know, there was Parabon facial imaging, which is a newer technology that can take DNA and produce a more three-dimensional image, and also kind of help to narrow down facial features, complexion, hair color, eye color. Some of these I feel like were different than previous sketches, which were based on description. This one is more based in science. So I think that's been a huge part of it. We've been told that that part of the reason he wasn't able to attend is things are really heating up, and this is good news for the case.
Yeah, I don't know if we mentioned it while we were recording, but our intent was to have Sergeant Bill Lott to be here with us tonight, and we had talked about that for weeks, and he was completely planning to do it. But as we know, there's been some breaks, and he is dedicated towards doing everything he can to solve this case, and he is busy. He let us know yesterday that
on top of all of his other responsibilities.
Yeah,
that's worth mentioning. He does a lot of this in his whatever extra time he has.
So he is actively spending time working on this case and is unable to be with us today, but we are so thankful for everything that he has done, how much he has contributed to our podcast,
yes,
and the work that he will continue to do beyond this episode and our season. And we are hopeful that the tools that he has been provided through Parabon, through this DNA facial recognition, that it will lead him one step closer to finding who did this to Betty and Catherine.
Yeah, and on that note, before the Parabon phenotyping was around, before that was available, the discussion was and still is a different type of DNA search, which hopefully we've explained, I hope, fairly well by now.
I think we're just now starting to understand it, so hopefully we've explained it well.
Familial search, and that is still needed. It's needed for not only Betty and Catherine's case, but it's needed for other unsolved crimes in Mississippi. Other people who are still waiting for answers years after the fact, where DNA may be present, but they still don't have an answer. They still don't have a suspect. So familial search, we believe, and Sergeant Lott has expressed support for this before, can not only help us in the present, but I think even more importantly, could help in the future.
Yeah, and I think that just like we were talking in our episode about DNA, is that I kind of grew up thinking that DNA was a magic bullet, right? You had DNA, they left it at the crime scene, you put it into a magic computer and it spit out the person who did the crime. And I learned very quickly that that's not the case. And so I think that every one of these tools, whether it be phenotyping or familial search, we want to give Sergeant Lott and the entire Starkville Police Department, hopefully the entire state of Mississippi, all of the tools necessary to be able to find the suspect. It might not be phenotyping, it might not be familial search, but every one of those tools that they have access to gives them more possibilities and more leads to be able to chase that will hopefully, if not find justice for Betty and Catherine, find justice for somebody's case that's out there that needs to be solved.
Yeah, so that begs the question, how do you do that? And that's something that we struggled with, I think, early on, is that if we want this to happen, how do you do that other than just wishing for it? And so we decided that with the end of our season that we wanted to make an attempt to get attention around this. And one of the ways to do that these days is with a change.org petition, which we mentioned in episode 7. And you can go there and you can find it. If someone is totally new to Betty's case and the podcast, not a problem. Our petition explains everything and explains what happened and why we're advocating for familial search in Mississippi. And it calls to attention the people in Mississippi government who could make this happen at the top levels. And with enough signatures, we believe that we can get their attention and in the future, put familial search into the tool belt, into the arsenal that local police have to investigate cold cases like Betty and Catherine.
Just a show of hands real quick for the people in the room. How many people have signed the petition? Okay, great.
Thank you.
That's huge.
Thank you.
I think last time I looked, and I can check real quick, I think we're at 195 signatures. So, just with the episode being out a few days, we're really encouraged with how many people are reading it and sharing it with their friends. And this is not just for our particular case, but, like I said, we're excited that this tool could be available to solve a lot of cases. Mom, what has been your experience as you've just been learning more about DNA and sort of the investigative tools throughout the process of the podcast?
Well, I agree with Juki when she said, why wouldn't everyone want all the science that can help? Even if you don't have anyone in your family or in your close circle of friends that something horrible like this has happened to, why wouldn't you be in support of any kind of help that the police could use to solve crimes that would take people off the street that could harm you or your children someday? It just makes perfect sense to us as mothers, and Juki's not as old as I am, but as a grandmother, I want all the protection possible for my family and my grandchildren.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as you start to look at the competing opinions on familial search, a lot of those revolve around privacy, right? I think a lot of it is based on misunderstanding on how you would use it, right? That if someone, gets a DNA strand from a crime scene and it happens to match with part of yours, are they going to come after you? And, we've learned that there are no convictions based on familial search. Familial search just allows them to make the group of people that they're looking at smaller, and then ultimately they'll go and get a pure sample of that DNA. We've heard about it getting stuff out of the trash or, getting it off a cup.
You go from a needle in a haystack to a needle in a hand of hay.
Yeah. And so ultimately, in order to convict, you've got to match 1-to-1, 100% the DNA strand from the pure sample and the one from the crime scene. So as we just started to look through that, we're like, well, okay, if it's not a witch hunt and if it's not violating privacy, then why wouldn't we use this? So that's what the petition is for, is really to bring continued awareness to that and ultimately to get the attention of some of those critical lawmakers that can actually make this happen.
And also it's worth noting that it's not an unknown, right? It's not, maybe this works, maybe we should try it. Certainly you can look and you can see the 12 other states that have used this to varying degrees of success. And we talk about that in the episode, in more than one episode, where you can see where this was used and it gave results in cases that had no breakthroughs in years. This one thing came through and helped them get to the person they were looking for. And then after that, then of course the rest is up to the courts. So that's what we want, is if that's what's stopping this from progressing to the resolution that everybody wants, then how do we make that happen? And our petition is what we think is one way to do that.
Yeah, and I think one more note on that is I think Simon and I were really purposeful in creating this podcast to not point fingers at theories or previous suspects. And I know there's a lot of true crime podcasts out there that do that and do that well to some level of success. But Simon and I are not, we're not investigators, and we just put ourselves in the shoes of people that have, maybe have been talked about as a suspect and haven't done it or the DNA doesn't match, if we continue to bring that up, we just didn't want to continue to sling mud at people who had already been vetted and looked through. And so that's why the whole podcast was driven towards what can we do to continue to give law enforcement tools rather than how can we go personally find the killer.
And who were these women? Who were they? Why did they matter? Why did what they did in their lives and their time here on earth, why did it matter? That was a huge piece that we felt like was missing from the story, at least online. And I hope that we've given some insight into who Betty Jones and Catherine Krigler were.
Let's take a quick break. While living in Ethiopia, some friends of mine witnessed firsthand the consequences of extreme poverty. They saw how Ethiopian women, in an effort to provide for themselves and their families, were forced to make unthinkable choices just to survive. These friends realized they wanted to give these women another choice, one that would provide them the opportunity to earn a living. It was from this experience that Fashionable was born. This movement started with a collection of hand-woven scarves, of which my wife has many, and has grown to include handmade leather bags and jewelry, apparel, shoes, and most recently, a premium denim line, lovingly crafted by women who have overcome extraordinary circumstances. We're so honored to partner with Fashionable and offer our listeners 15% off their first order. Go to livefashionable.com and use the discount code KNOCK15 at checkout. Again, visit livefashionable.com today to help bring opportunity and choice to these amazing women. We have a group of people here in Starkville, Mississippi with us that have joined us for our live Q&A, and we would love to open the floor to any questions. We have a microphone in the middle. If you feel weird about walking up to the microphone, we can take it off and pass it around, or you can take it back to your seat or whatever you'd like. But we would love to answer any questions that we can about making the podcast, about Betty and Catherine, about anything pertaining to the case that we can answer. This is your time. We'd love to field any questions you might have.
Hi. I really didn't have any knowledge of this case other than the news. I was a student here and left by 87, but I had heard of it, and I started listening to the podcast because I didn't know what podcasts were either until my daughter got me listening to them. So yours was one of the, Up and Vanished was the first one, and then yours was the next one.
That's a good place to start.
Right.
Pain is great, yeah.
So I do have a couple of questions. If one thing, has GenWeb been used like they used in the Golden State Killer? So that's been explored. And then what about using the familial search in the states that do allow? Do you know if this DNA that's all been exhausted? Have they run that familial search in the states that do allow it?
Yeah, so the first one, you might be able to speak to a little bit.
I can do that. So you're right. It was not familial search with the Golden State Killer. It was genealogy. And we went over that very briefly in, I think, episode 6. Mm-hmm. To our knowledge, no. It has not. That is genealogy and familial search are kind of neck and neck with the advances in DNA searching. And is one better than the other? It's hard to tell now. Could one become the standard and the other be obscure in the future? Possibly. But it's not real clear yet. And we heard more about that from Rock Harmon, who was very, very gracious with his time explaining to us and our audience kind of the difference between that. But certainly that is a possibility that the genealogy technology could be used as well. We decided we wanted to be laser focused on one cause, one thing that we could advocate for, and we, based on our conversations with Rock Harmon and Sergeant Bill Lott, we decided to zero in on familial search. Do you want to take the...
Yeah, I think the second part of your question is really great. Now, to my understanding, it's all about the state of origin. So, like, being able to run familial search against the national database, you have to have permission from the state. So I think that, for instance, I think that California can run it against California and the state, but I think that you have to have a particular level of protocol and the software
at the crime lab.
Yeah, so the Mississippi Crime Lab is the one who has the samples. Okay. And so they have to have the software within the crime lab to be able to run it. And then once they run it, they can both run it against Mississippi and the National CODIS database. But it has to start at the state level.
And a decision like that to use such a software is not at the whim of a technician or just an employee. It comes from... In previous states where it has happened, it comes from a higher level, such as an attorney general.
Yeah, or it was in the case of, I think, the Golden State Killer, or maybe the other one that we mentioned. It was
Grim Sleeper.
It was the district attorney. So the district attorney who wanted to see progress, he advocated for it and then was able to push that through. So what we learned is that it takes one person, and not podcasters. It takes someone that has influence and is in government to really advocate for this particular case and say, why aren't we using this, and what would it take to use that? And what we understand is what it takes is a protocol, which there are many states that have protocols set in place that Mississippi can adopt. So it would take adopting that level of protocol and a piece of software that I think Rock quoted is a few $1,000s for the crime lab to be able to use.
And possibly free. I've also heard that there was even a way to do it without cost.
Yeah, it's just you're taking a crime lab who probably, to empathize with the crime lab, it's probably a set of people who are already overworked, trying to do a lot of different things, and you're saying, hey, can you add another thing to your stack? We believe it's worth it, but it's going to take someone who has influence over those particular parts of government in order to be able to make it happen.
I have one more question.
Sure,
yeah.
Speaking of taking on more than you planned, I was wondering if you would ever be interested in doing another podcast on any unsolved Mississippi cases to help push this familial DNA, cases that have DNA sitting there where they could also use this. I mean, just curious if you had thought about doing that. And I'm going to sit down after I say that I want to thank you because you have made Miss Betty Jones and Miss Catherine Krigler be real people to people who did not know them. And they're not just a name or a statistic. And, I just want to thank you for that because I think you've done them proud. So, good job, Mom. And I'm going to sit down and let you answer that.
Thank you.
I forgot her question. I'm emotional now. It was another podcast. Yeah, we've actually been asked about that a lot. I think that I have no business making a true crime podcast. Simon, I won't speak for you. Maybe you'll go on and do another true crime podcast. But for us, this was so intensely personal that I believe that if we were to do a season 2 of Knock Knock, it would cover the arrest, trial and conviction of the murderer and rapist of Betty Jones and Catherine Krigler. And it would be my honor to do a season 2 on that subject. I think as far as Mississippi trials, I hope that what we've done is to ignite a flame into people that can buy a recorder and a couple of microphones and go start asking people questions. I mean, we're from Houston, we live in Tennessee, we love Mississippi, we have roots here, and we would absolutely be willing to mentor and talk to anybody who would want to start a podcast about the probably limitless unsolved crimes here in Mississippi. But I think we're going to take a break from true crime. It's been a pretty dark, heavy journey for us. Simon, what are your thoughts on that?
One of the things Jason said to me at the very beginning, when he told me he was going to do this and he wanted my help, he put it to me this way. He said, how many other grandchildren are sitting around their kitchen table wondering what happened to their grandmother? Could be aunts and nephews, could be uncles and nieces. Anyone who's lost a cherished family member and doesn't have the answers that they deserve to have that. That's not right. They deserve those answers. And if you were in that position and you thought there was anything you could do, wouldn't you do it? If that's make a podcast about it, if that's grab some cameras and a microphone and start talking to people, some of which are happy to talk to you, some of which aren't. If that's make a petition to get the government to allow a special new type of DNA search, wouldn't you do it? So when he put that to me, how many other grandchildren are wondering this? It really, I think, put us on the same track mentally of what we were going to do and why we were going to do it and see it through to the end. So thank you. Thank you for coming and asking those questions. And we appreciate the kind words you said. We believe they're here with us. And we hope that if they don't have justice in the courts, we hope that we've at least given their story justice.
Yeah, and it's so important to us also to advocate for Catherine Krigler. The Kriglers are family for us. I mean, there's just no question about it. I was texting with Juki earlier today, and she is so passionate about finding out what happened and hopefully finding out before her father goes from this world to the next. You know, that's what she's hopeful for, and we do it for her, and we do it for I do it for mom and dad, and we do it for people like Betty Hong, and we're, I don't know, it's if I look back and all we've done is give an example to others of what it takes just to speak up when no one else is, then I'm honored to have done it.
Did you have any thoughts, Mom?
I'm just so proud of my children. And I know that Betty would be as well. I know that she still knows them as grown men. She knew them as little kids, and was so proud to have grandchildren. She had other grandchildren besides my two, and she was a fantastic grandmother. And I am a child of the 50s. I'm older now than Betty was when she died, and I believe in the science that has come about in my lifetime, and I just feel like the clock is ticking, and we're wasting time not using everything that's available to us now, especially when through the computer age, it's virtually free for the states to share with each other. It doesn't require any law changes. It just requires someone in authority to say, this is what we're going to do from now on, and we are going to alleviate the pain that these families have been suffering all these years from not knowing, because that hole in your heart, it never really goes away.
Mm.
Okay. I was here when all this happened. I'm a resident of Starkville, live in Memphis now. But I was a junior in high school when all this happened, and certainly I remember when it all happened, and it was horrible. My question is, why is familial search not readily available? Is it a funding issue? If it just takes somebody to say, let's do this, why is nobody saying, let's do this? That doesn't really make sense to me, why that, if it's available and it's just a software and there are options to do it for free, why is that not happening?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think
Tennesseans think alike.
yeah, Tennesseans do think alike. I'm still a Texan. We'll claim Tennessee after a few more years. I'm still a Texan. That's a great question, and I think we need to continue to scream that question from the rooftops. We just today or yesterday, there's a student reporter for the Reflector who wrote a piece. I believe it's in today's Reflector, Simon, is that right?
Yes, today's.
And who I believe she's listened to our podcast and feels the exact same way you do, is that logically, if you go through it and this is a tool that's available, why are we not using it? And as we started talking with Rock Harmon, that was my question. Okay, walk me through it. Step 1, what do we do? Step 2, what do we do? And his response was, it just takes the right person and the right case. We believe we have the right case. We believe that these two women, one, they deserve justice. They were beloved by their community and have had the national attention over the years. Back in 1993 with America's Most Wanted, all of the articles in various papers, the coverage that we've gotten in the papers across the region. We believe that this case has enough of a impact on the community that this is the case. We need to find out who the person is.
Well, so that was my next question is, that we had the America's Most Wanted piece back in 1993, and that was a national coverage, but have you guys been contacted by anybody nationally to take this to a larger audience? Because sometimes it just takes getting it in front of the right person, just getting the story in general in front of the right person to just be like, oh, well, I'll make a phone call and it's done, So I'm just wondering, has there been major national attention other than just our local interest?
There is, I'll say there is national attention.
By the way, Simon is, he's missed his calling. He is good at public relations, so I'm going to let him field that question because I get in trouble when I get behind a microphone. Go ahead.
I'll say in 2018 there is national attention. You may not see it until 2019, but the attention is there. And that's what we can say right now. I sincerely wish I could go on and on about it. I really could. But we want people to know there is attention. There are eyes on this case beyond Starkville, beyond Mississippi. There are eyes on this case, and the story will be told again.
And I would say that the best thing that we can say is continue to stay connected with us on social media. We will give you as much information as we possibly can. You know what? I'm having a little bit of like a looking at myself from the outside in, is I remember listening to podcasts that said similar things where they would dance around things and we can't tell you. And now I'm living in it and I'm sorry. I feel really bad because I know how frustrating it is to not be able to know what's going on. But we have been very fortunate that we have had interest from multiple sources of national media, and we're excited about the progress that we're seeing, and stay tuned. Yeah? Awesome.
So was there ever any possible motive given for why this crime was committed against Catherine and Betty? And were there any theories that y'all were privy to that maybe we haven't heard about on the podcast yet?
Yeah. So I'll answer the second part of that first. So when you open up a forum and a call line and social media accounts, and you put out episodes about a unsolved murder, you get every single theory under the sun. I mean, the only one I don't think we got was aliens. That's the only one I think that we didn't get. Everything else we got. And we established really early on with Sergeant Lott, we told him, like, this is the show that we're going to make is not about saying, you know, it was this guy, or, you know, going and chasing this guy, or, you know, that was not what we were planning on doing. We wanted to advocate for something bigger than that. And so we have consistently over the past year, I would say, Simon, we've sent Sergeant Lott maybe 8 to 10 leads that he has responded to and disqualified. If he had qualified them, we would be having a different conversation right now. But I would say that what has blown me away, and Simon, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but what's blown me away is how many people will engage us and spend hours and hours and hours digging through yearbooks, digging through newspapers, looking at, I mean, we would literally get images that would put side by side the faces of the renderings and yearbook photos. And it was like, oh my gosh, like I was so honored that people were so interested in spending this time. And those, if anybody in this room did that, those went immediately to Sergeant Lott. It was like, we sent it right over and had those conversations offline with him. And so I don't want anybody to ever think that those just went into like the trash bin. We were serious about every single one of those. We knew we didn't want to like put those on blast on the show, but we took them very seriously and sent them on to authorities. I mean, every theory that you have heard, we have heard. All the theories of the guy next door that was at the party, the person who moved to Florida that then ended up killing an elderly couple, the person that was on the football team that was kind of odd and got into trouble. We've heard all of those without naming any names, and Sergeant Lott literally exhaustively went through, here's why that guy is not it. And I think we talked about on one of the episodes how Sergeant Lott will literally be talked to in town. Well, you know it was that guy, and I bleeped out the guy's name. Many of you probably know who that is. I bleeped out his name, and he said, you know it was so-and-so. And he goes, well, the DNA doesn't match. And people literally would say to him, well, then your DNA is wrong.
And how do you argue with that, you know?
Yeah, so yes. I mean, we did hear.
One more thing I want to add to this is that many times on true crime television, true crime podcasts, you're going to hear about suspects and you're going to hear about all this kind of stuff from a case that's already gone to court and testimony that's on record. And people were sworn in before giving this testimony, and a lot of the true crime tells that story. You're talking about hours and hours of testimony, and they condense it for the consumption of the public, of an audience. We don't have that. We don't have court testimony because we haven't had that breakthrough. So it would be terrible of us to talk about someone who should have the presumption of innocence and should be able to have a jury of their peers that are unbiased decide their punishment. And we felt like if we start throwing around names and we start throwing around theories and conspiracy theories, that it not only does damage to the case, but we're not honoring Betty and Catherine when we do that. That's not what they would want. So that kind of guided us in sticking to the facts, sticking to what we need to move this forward, and talking about who these women were. One more shout out before we end or wrap up. Daphne and Amy on Facebook have been, from the beginning, they're some of the deep divers on this case, and they've been in frequent contact with us, finding things that we didn't know about and passing along information. So thank you to those people. We appreciate your time and how much you care about this.
Let's take another quick break.
If there's one thing I've learned about Betty through this process, it's that her life was dedicated to giving back. I know she would have loved organizations like Thistle Farms. At first glance, Thistle Farms is a world-class provider of natural home and body products. In the summer, their bug spray is a must. But what is truly amazing about these items are the people who make them. All of Thistle Farms' products are lovingly crafted by women, survivors of trafficking, prostitution, and addiction. You see, beneath the surface, what Thistle Farms really is a place that provides safe housing, economic independence, and a strong community of advocates for these women. Take a minute to visit thistlefarms.org and learn more about this amazing organization. And while you're there, use the discount code KNOCK15 for 15% off your first order. That's thistlefarms.org, where love is the most powerful force for change in the world. Simon, can you remind our listeners how they can connect with you and contribute to what we're doing?
Yeah, so we have a Facebook group. We have a Facebook page, and then we also have a group that you can ask to join, the Knock Knock Podcast discussion group. And there you can connect with other people in our community, and you can post or discuss and engage with people that are really into this. So if you're on Facebook, you just ask to join. Of course, we'll approve you, and you can come in. We're also on Twitter and on Instagram, and you can send us a message through our website, knockknockpodcast.com. We have like a contact form on our homepage you can fill out if you want to send us a private message, and that comes right to our email. We also have a phone number set up. It's 1-888-57-BETTY. You can give us a call and leave us a voicemail with thoughts or questions, and we will respond to that as well.
To join the Knock Knock community, be sure and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Knock Knock Pod. There you can ask questions, leave comments, or just say hi. We've also set up a voicemail at 1-888-57-BETTY. If you have comments or questions, or you'd like to be a part of the show, please call and leave a message. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you download podcasts. Reviews are key to keeping Knock Knock on the charts where people can find our show. Knock Knock is produced by Chris Cerrone and me. Special thanks to the Knock Knock team, Lacey Orcioli, Rebecca Jones, Jason Adams, Simon Jones, Cole Flynn, Colleen Jones, and Maggie Thomas.
We'd also like to give a special thank you to everyone who has made this season possible. John Cohen, Danielle Craig, Ann and Shep Krigler, Steve and Sharon Davis, Ray Gillespie, Rock Harmon, Emma Hawes, Juki Krigler Holt, Betty, Kim, and Kun Hung, Stratton Keratosis, Richard Kirby, Sergeant Bill Lott, Ben Nagel, Whitney Nichols, Thistle Farms, Marley Olson, Jordan Walker, Stacy Wilson, Fashionable, Barrett Ward, and Marissa Pardo, and Matthew Perryman Jones.
We'll keep you posted with any updates to both our story and the case, so please continue to share the podcast with your friends and family. Also, please take a minute to sign our petition to approve DNA familial searching in Mississippi by visiting our website and clicking on the banner at the top of the page. We promise it'll only take a minute, and it does so much for this important cause. Thanks again for subscribing to the Knock Knock Podcast.